Hello, I'm Dr. Albert Liao, and today we'll be talking about a really important and frequently used statistical technique, mediation and moderation. So first of all, I'll introduce you to research questions involving mediation and moderation. And then second, I'll illustrate how we can analyze mediation relationships using SPSS. First of all, let's take a quick look at the research process. When we do research, we will start off with research questions. So for example, we might be looking at whether playing violent video games, does that lead to aggression? Or we might be interested in whether Facebook use is related to happiness. In the next step, we would generate hypotheses. So we want to test and see whether these research questions are true or not. So if people play more violent video games, does that lead to aggression? So we need to measure the level of video games that they play. We need to measure the level of aggression. So the other question about Facebook use and happiness, we need to measure the level of Facebook use, and we need to measure the level of happiness. So we have to specify the nature of the relationship between these variables. And we might be basing our hypothesis on prior research or other theoretical frameworks. So the first research question that we are used to is, what is the relationship between variables of interest? But today I would like to introduce to you two different kinds of research questions. So a second research question is, how does the phenomenon work? Through what mechanism does A lead to B? Through what mechanism does playing violent video games lead to aggression? This is the mediation type of research question. Third, we want to look at moderating relationships. What factors influence the relationship between the two variables? So for example, we may be looking at the relationship between Facebook use and happiness. So maybe it depends. Does Facebook use lead to happiness? It may depend on how you use it. Maybe if you use the Facebook by interacting with people, then yes, you might become happier. But if you only use the Facebook to look at what other people are doing, then maybe you might become less happy, you might become sad seeing how much fun other people are having. Okay. So the first kind of research question, which I mentioned, looking at the relationships between variables, oftentimes we're doing a correlational analysis. So we might be measuring Facebook use and then happiness, and then we want to see whether those two variables are related or not. Okay. In the second type of research question, which I'm introducing to you today, how does the phenomenon work? We want to look at what is the mechanism through which A can become B. Okay. So let's take this example. Training oftentimes leads to better performance. Right? If you train people, they perform better. But we might be interested in the mechanism. How does training lead to better performance? So one possibility could be knowledge or skill. Right? When we train people, they have more knowledge. When they have more knowledge, then they perform better. So this would be an example of a mediating relationship. Okay. So in one famous study, researchers wanted to know, when people are abused by their family members, for example, children who are abused, they become more aggressive. So psychologists have been interested in the mechanism. Why do they become more aggressive? So these researchers showed that it's because the abuse leads to different social information processing. These children think differently. They look at the world as an aggressive place. And then because of that, they become more aggressive. Okay. Now, let's look at the moderating relationship. So what factors influence the relationship between two variables? Let's take, for example, the same relationship between training and performance. We may find that sometimes when we train people, their performance improves. But other times we train people and their performance doesn't improve. So what could be the difference? One possible difference is prior experience. Maybe for people with some prior experience, the training will improve their performance. But people with no experience at all, then the training does not improve their performance. So it shows that having some experience will be important. Otherwise, the training will not lead to better performance. Okay, so that's another example. Another example would be life stress and depression. Right? So we find that there's a relationship between life stress and depression. People who have more stress tend to be more depressed. But all of us have stress, but not all of us are depressed. So why is it that for some people, stress leads to depression, but other people, stress doesn't lead to depression? Okay, let me explain to you a situation. Imagine if you are walking on the street and then suddenly you step on something soft and squishy. Then you realize, oh no, I stepped on bird poop. So one person might step on this bird poop and start blaming other people and say, oh, that silly bird, go and poop everywhere. Why didn't the people clean up this place? So if you start blaming other people, then you start feeling very angry. Right? But another person might step on the poop and then start blaming themselves. Right? They say, oh, bad things always happen to me. This morning my significant other scolded me, and then I lost $50, and then I knocked my head. Bad things are always happening to me. So if you start thinking those kind of negative thoughts, then you feel very sad or depressed. Another person might step on the bird poop and think, wow, this is my lucky day. I'm going to win the lottery. So everyone experiences stress, but how they react to it will give them different kinds of feelings. Right? So whether life stress leads to depression depends on whether you have negative cognition. Right? That means for people who have a lot of negative cognition, life stress will lead to depression. But those who do not have this negative cognition, life stress does not lead to depression. So this negative cognition is the moderating variable. It will influence the relationship between life stress and depression. Another way to illustrate moderating relationships is by using a graph. So in this graph, you can see the relationship between stress and depression. So stress is on the x-axis and depression is on the y-axis. So in the higher line representing high negative cognition, we see that as stress increases, depression also increases. But in the lower line representing low negative cognition, we see that as stress increases, depression doesn't increase so much. So this graph illustrates how negative cognition moderates the relationship between stress and depression.